This is Theology Bits with Pastor Ben, and we are continuing in our series related to our Tuesday night class called A New Church, A New World. And this is our third session that will be talking about the space of the Pacific Northwest, often called the none zone, meaning those who are religiously affiliating as none, meaning not one of the above, when asked what kind of religiosity do you have. So today I'd like to explore what does this really mean and how does it look? And the basis of a lot of this data is going to come from a new book that's in an edited volume called Religion at the Edge, published in 2022, with a collection of essays addressing religiosity in the Pacific Northwest. And one of the aspects is very much when people talk about what kind of religiosity they express in the Pacific Northwest, much more than the rest of the country, people are identifying as none. In fact, according to their data, they find up to 44% of the residents in the Pacific Northwest, or what they call in the book Cascadia, are identifying as none, especially in Oregon and Washington. The second factor of this is a fundamental decline in membership and attendance in most traditional mainline churches. And Central Lutheran, being part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, is one of these mainline churches. And so many people have said, well, here's this very non-religious space. But we're going to find it's actually quite complicated, because while there has been a decline in mainline churches, while there is this very large percentage of the people who are claiming no religious affiliation, there's other things going on. After all, there has in fact been growth in some religious communities, especially conservative evangelical communities, and in non-Christian communities. Which is kind of odd, especially with the evangelical, where we have a very liberal space we're living in. Why is conservative Christianity growing at all? Odd. And so we're going to be reflecting on a little bit of what's going on here. And what we find with this complication is that scholars have noted that, well, are they really no religious affiliation? In the sense of no affiliation is true, but is there no religiosity? Well, that's a harder question. And they find instead that there is a sense among a vast majority of people, both those in churches and those not, of reverential naturalism. This is a term coined by these authors of this volume. And that what this idea is, of course, is that reverential naturalism is about nature, and that nature has a twofold factor for very many people, including many of the none category. On the one hand, there is a scientific approach to nature around them, a scientific understanding of what nature is and how they fit within it, what's happening in nature, but also a mystical quality to nature. And in that, we find this kind of sense of what Rudolf Otto might have called the numinous, that when they're out in nature, they see something greater than themselves. They feel there is something that can be experienced but not understood, that is larger and present. Now, this does not require that it is framed in any kind of religious institution, making it a space for many of these in this none category. And so what they find is that this reverential naturalism is, in fact, an embodied experience, something that is held in a place, not just an idea, but something where you're there, making it thereby mystical, but still finding this understanding of nature undergirded with scientific understandings. So it's kind of a double move. And so you end up with this reverential naturalism of, yes, indeed, something kind of like what we would call the spiritual, but in two ways. Because of the mystical component, we see that it is described as awe or beauty, but because of the scientific understanding, also a sense of mortality, a sense that, well, we are, in fact, as beings in nature, quite seemingly sometimes insignificant, whilst at the same time recognizing there's something greater than ourselves. Both things tied together. And so it is spiritual, but largely unorganized in any kind of way, and wildly individual. I and another person might have a similar sense of the mystical in nature, but the fact that my experience is like unto someone else's is merely a coincidence, and they have nothing to do with one another. Instead, what we have is a fundamental attitude of, you do you. Your experience, your mystical experience, is your own and not necessarily related to anybody else. Well, we will be talking about this in more cases, but there's an aspect of this that's worth thinking about. One of which is because of this very attitude, they suggest, the authors of this sociological book suggest that there is an incredibly low cost to innovation, trying new things, because socially, if you find novel and new ways of expressing religiosity, you will likely not be very judged. Because of the very independent character that religiosity expresses. So we find a space for what some have called religious entrepreneurs. There is not a space in the country, they say, that is as least risky to try new things. Some religious communities have taken this on. They've really embraced that this is a fundamentally different space, and that people are okay with trying new things, trying new aspects. People individually certainly are already doing that. Some borrowing aspects of religiosity from one religious tradition and another without seeing any problem at all. Some denominational religious affiliated groups have in fact embraced it. And this is probably what has to do with the growth of these groups, who are built far less on historic institutional structures and instead far more starting new things. And as a result, are able to take advantage of this fact that it's such a low cost to try new ways of expressing their religiosity. We will be talking more about this dynamic, but what we're left with is, here in the none zone, it is not just that nobody's religious, but a very complicated picture that has a variety of nuances that is very worth us taking a look at, because we can see what are the new opportunities for our churches and our spaces in 2023 in the Pacific Northwest. This is Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.